All right, welcome everyone. We're Semblance of Sanity. I'm Caleb.
I'm Jacob.
And we're here, of course, for podcast
Number 16.
Number 16, yes.
Now,
we're going to be talking about character deaths, but before
we
do
are.
that,
Announcements.
some announcements.
That's
so
right.
first off, order of
Most
business
important.
Thing here, I am going to be on a trip from now until December 15th. So if you're watching this podcast, I am already on a plane headed away from the Pacific Northwest.
Exactly.
It's going to be a lot of fun. You can keep up with me on Twitter. I'll be posting pictures there. But yes, what that means, unfortunately, is that we won't be having podcast until I come back.
Right.
December 15th. So that'll be the Monday after that. But we also
Ruby.
will have to delay Ruby episodes.
Yeah.
So sorry, guys. I know that that's...
it bums us out a bunch,
It bums us out a lot, too. Specifically you.
Yeah.
Because you could watch them, and I could, too. But
yeah.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
We'll just have
Won't
to
be there to
wait
record them.
for that.
But with that being said, we do have some new stuff coming very soon.
We do.
But just to clarify, all other shows will be working just as fine, just as normal.
Yep.
And let's go over that schedule because there's something that
Right.
was added recently, but now it's going
Exactly.
public soon.
Right. So, Death Parade, that should already be up.
Yep.
And then Tuesday, Hunter x Hunter. Wednesday, here's the new one. So Psychopaths ended.
Yep.
Now, the first episode of Made in Abyss should be going public on that day.
Yep.
Of course, that means you can get the second episode on
Early access
on Patreon.
Correct.
And then Thursday, another Hunter x Hunter. Friday,
My Hero
My Hero Academia. Saturday, just JoJo's.
Well, no, you'll still get Ruby.
Oh, yeah, that's
You'll
right.
still get Ruby.
Yes, that's right.
But the episodes after that, because we have to push it out a week in advance. But yeah, you'll get Ruby and JoJo's.
Yeah, we'll get Ruby and JoJo's, but then that'll be the last one until Caleb gets back for Ruby.
Yeah.
And then Sunday, of course, Hype Q.
Hype Q.
And then it all starts over again.
All that happens before and all will happen again. Yep.
Yeah.
But with this one being about character deaths, we wanted to say something for you guys right up front. We've dealt with a lot of shows and mentioned a lot of spoilers and things over the time. But
with
for this
spoiler warnings or whatever.
Yeah, but for this one, we don't want to do that. So just in general, don't worry about spoilers because we won't talk about specific character deaths.
Right.
We'll talk about them as the process,
what they mean, what they represent, and all that. Yeah.
And all that.
Before we do that, though, we have a shout out to make.
Yes, of course. For Gav, or Almighty Gavlin on
that
Patreon.
One Gav. He goes by many names.
Yes, but either way, he is our resident awesome Brit for our Patreon and stuff. And we wanted to thank you so much, dude. Call you out for your awesome support on Patreon. You are also one of the first VIP patrons we ever had.
Yep.
So we're giving you another shout out.
I think you might actually be the first.
You might actually be the first. We have to double check on that. But you mean a lot to us, dude, and we appreciate your support.
Thank you so much for believing in us.
Yeah. It's people like Gav who make it able for us to do what we do here, and we want to do more and more of that.
Yeah.
So thank you a lot.
Because when we first started this out, we were like, should we actually do a Patreon? Will anyone actually want it? So thank you.
And it was these guys basically who were like, no, please do it as soon as possible. So
thank you.
Here we are. Here we are now.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So with character deaths.
Character deaths.
Now, Jacob, I am of the opinion that character deaths are an essential thing for a story that that actually needs character deaths. So now that's a little bit. I know, but bear with me here. The idea
tautology.
There's an idea that you could have a story like Lord of the Rings, where yes, there is a character that dies in Lord of the Rings. I'm not even going to say who for spoiler reasons, but
we already said too much.
I know, right? But in movies like Lord of the Rings, you get often this thing of the plot armor, the characters won't die.
Yeah.
And it works for most of them, but for these kind of good versus evil stories, or, some massive conflict where there's a war or something like
whatever,
that. Character deaths can be huge.
They can be huge.
And
but
I think they're necessary.
Right. And I would just like to preface this with, not all stories need character deaths.
That is true.
Lord of the Rings, sometimes people bash it because, the epic rap battles where it's like, nobody dies, I know it's going to happen by page in age 5, blah, blah, blah. But one of the lines I absolutely love from that is that it's fantasy. So having it be unrealistic sometimes is fine, even if it's a setting where normally people would die, or if you're in a story where it doesn't make sense for a character to die, that's not the focus, then you don't need to have them.
That's true.
But if you do...
Yes.
Oh boy.
I will say that there are a couple story styles that have ended up becoming kind of jokes with regards to character deaths. One is, I would say, the Nicholas Sparks kind of formula, and that one I would say has kind of it was done really well, I would say, quite a few different times, but it has come to the point where once character deaths themselves become a formula, it ruins the whole story in a lot of ways.
And not to say that you can't have character deaths where, like, okay, you know it's coming, or something like that, like, because you
Dead 1 and Dead 2, you see them and you're like, okay, those characters are going to die.
But you can still pull it off. You just need to make sure that you're treating it seriously, and even if it does follow some sort of cliche or predictable trend or whatever,
in Star Trek.
like red shirts in Star Trek.
Yep.
Spoilers, I know if you love the red shirts, I'm sorry, some of them die. But
don't worry, we're not talking about named characters.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't worry.
But just do it justice. Like, and it's because there's never a point where you can't do something right, even if it's like a cliche or whatever.
Sure.
Any cliche can be done well. They became cliches for a reason.
Right.
But with character deaths, it's already so, like, hard to relate to, I think, because very few of us have to deal with, not like loved ones dying, but like loved ones being killed.
Right.
That you want to make sure that you don't tone down the emotions.
Right, and this isn't necessarily, I want to say that's a very specific type of character death. I'm talking about everything from disease, from everything from old age. Basically one of the things of a lot of the stories I've really come to enjoy are the characters that basically are passing on something. And when death happens as a form in the story, it's basically a way to have a legacy character tied to the character that died.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a thing that I would say some stories use and abuse in a way to instigate character development for the character that's the legacy character. But in as much as it's a thing to where there's a lot of potential depth that can come from there, having characters that aren't necessarily killed or brutally murdered or anything like that, but have just a dying of old age and pass along something to the next generation is a very like archetypal thing. So having different types of character deaths where it's not necessarily just a murder or a killing of some kind adds a lot of, I'd say, real life opportunities for symbolism, themes, and what have you.
And just visceral emotions.
Yes, I think that's the main reason why people do character deaths.
Because, like, the sense of loss that should come from a character death, whether it's a brutal, like, killing, or whether it's, your
grandma,
your grandma that passed away in her sleep or something like that. You feel things from that, like if your grandma,
if it's handled right,
if it's handled right, but like in real life, if one of your loved ones passed away,
a family member passed away, you
would absolutely feel that. And a lot of times, because especially nowadays, it's become a bit more like cool to kill off characters,
right?
Whether it's through natural means or
what have you,
what have you. A lot of times, I feel like the creators will take the character death for granted.
Sure.
Like they won't truly handle it as if, like, no, there's this person that you really, really care about that is not a character.
Right.
Right. It's a person that is dying.
Yes.
And
for sure.
Like
that's a very good distinction, because there's a lot of stories where they build up a character for death. It's basically like prepping a pig for slaughter, and you can feel it before the character death is even a mile away. And you're like, all right, well, my immersion is just completely ruined because now I know this character is completely set up to die.
Right.
And then when they do, you don't feel anything. You're robbed of the opportunity to feel some really great things because you built a character up specifically to die.
And by the way, usually when that happens, it's not because the character was built up specifically to die. It's that because they were built up specifically to die, the creator did not have the characters in the story have the emotional impact that would happen if that person were to actually die. It's
right.
like, let's say there's some side character that's introduced, right? Yeah. And then they're killed off. They've only been in the show for maybe like 10 minutes, right? Or you know, however long they've been in there. Right. But they had a whole life that they lived. The people that knew them, especially if they knew them from more than the scope of the show,
right.
they should feel a lot of things.
Right.
A lot of very different things when they die.
Yeah, absolutely. And even though you can't necessarily communicate that exact level of emotion to the viewers, they get a taste of it by it being felt through proxy of the characters that are feeling it.
Right.
So one of the things that you kind of see in a lot of stories where a character dies is that residual lasting effect it had on those that were closest to them.
Yes.
And that aspect of a story I've seen a lot of people shy away from, in particular, because it's harder to write.
And it is harder to write, but it's so necessary.
It's so worth it.
That's what makes the character deaths worth it. Yeah, exactly. Because otherwise, it's just like it could be seen as just a sloppy way to resolve a character. You didn't really know what to do with them, so you just killed them off. Now they're gone. Right. But if you have them have lasting, like their death have a lasting impact, because a character death would have a lasting impact with real people. Absolutely.
Right.
That's a lot of times where the most impact comes from.
Yep.
Not the actual fact that they're dead now.
They're dead. Right.
It's all those times later when someone might think like,
"Oh, I wish they were here right now."
Yeah, like they'll be like, "Oh man, I got to tell so and so about this crazy thing that they're gone."
Yeah. It's the idea of loss being a huge theme in any story. Like almost every story deals with loss in some way. But only a specific few stories that involve character deaths actually have the characters handling loss.
Yep.
One of the most annoying things that I've seen in most movies where you don't have as much time to deal with that as a story
is they'll get over it really quick.
So instead of showing them dealing with any loss, like showing them dealing with no loss, what they'll do is they'll set up this contrived sort of pseudo feeling of loss that they don't transition out of in any way. It's just suddenly, boop, they're gone. That feeling of loss is just over. Because what it is they'll tell the actor, for instance, we're setting up this scene where there's this feeling of loss, and they'll maybe communicate it really well, and then they'll be like, oh, the feelings, and then you feel it, and then they'll go through some editing. The person will come in 3 weeks later to shoot the scene that's after that. And they'll be.
And if the direction isn't super good, they won't know to oh, that's right.
That was yesterday.
5 minutes of screen time later.
Right.
I just watched my best friend get brutally murdered.
Right.
Or,
instead of weeping, I'm now just completely out of it. It's fine. So there's an aspect also where I want to say that anime in particular, or just animated stuff in particular, has the opportunity to utilize the singular vision or the team's vision of what's being communicated here much better than those that have the potential of miscommunication from a director to actor. And
also because anytime you're in a format like an anime or whatever, where you have more time to work with, you can have the person go through the stages of grief and and all that stuff that sometimes gets sort of glossed over in a movie because you only have a couple hours.
For sure. Also, another thing is when character deaths happen in a book, I found that it's handled even better sometimes than in a show, an animated show even, because there's the internal stuff that's going on that the books tend to communicate better even than the shows that will have internal monologuing or dialogue or what have you. They'll focus on describing the feelings with some sort of imagery, there's a big weight on them now, that there's all this all these dark emotions that can come up with the feelings of loss, but also these potential positive ones of hope, or what have you, and that being communicated well in a book can leave you sobbing for weeks on end just because of a death handled really well. And I know many of you probably have experienced that, where there was a book where that
across the room.
That character death was equal to 10 character deaths in that one show that handles character deaths really well. I don't know.
Yeah. And specifically with books, a lot of times they can do it even better because since there is no visual aspect to it, it's just with the person's imagination. And when you get into imagination as far as emotions are concerned, especially when you have those guiding words for just, leading him in the right direction and to the right magnitude.
Mm-hmm.
Oh boy, it can absolutely destroy you.
Well, yeah, also it can take you into a place of, like, existential thought where you're realizing that, death is something that's, part of life. Mm-hmm. It's natural. It's something that everyone's going to experience at some point. And having someone, go into kind of questions about that topic from, a fictional character death is really powerful. Yeah. It's one of those things to where it can elevate the story beyond what it currently is objectively because of the subjective experience that they had based around a specific character death. Mm-hmm. I can cite multiple ones where I remember watching, well, not watching, but in my head I was watching it because I'm reading a book. But a character death happened that really struck me and like a chord, like deep in here. And I had to set the book down and just think about life for an hour or two. And that right there is masterful storytelling. It's not me being necessarily some, completely crazy imaginative person.
Right.
It's just that emotion, that very human experience being communicated so well that it breaks through any barriers that I had potentially put up to be ready for those types of emotions and experiences and thoughts and questions and what have you.
Yeah.
But also with going specifically into anime, one of the things I've noticed about character deaths in particular is character deaths are often a thing that's like the one death, It's that idea of, that in this medium of whatever show it is, if it's a show that actually involves character deaths, they'll have the one death
that's sacrificed on the altar of feels.
Exactly. And it's basically a lot of times it's a cheap way to get a reaction out of people if the character themselves wasn't a character. They were just kind of a prop.
And not to say that you can't do that and do it well, but it basically makes it so that then you're not...
Well, I'm generalizing.
Right. But when there are character deaths like that, that it basically means that they're solely relying on the emotions of the other characters that did know that person.
Yes.
So it makes it a lot tougher, at the very least.
For sure. Also, another thing that I've noticed in anime in particular is the cheating death kind of thing that goes on. Is you'll have the idea where they'll take... It goes a step beyond in some ways, where they'll actually get the feels out of the the death that didn't happen,
but then they aren't actually dead.
Then they somehow cheat death, and what it actually does, I feel like this is a problem. This is something that shouldn't be done as much as it is currently. At least very much really, really focus on your execution to make sure it's done quite well. Otherwise, you're actually negatively affecting things in your show. I know superhero things in particular seem to do this, is having like the villain fall down an endless pit and you think they died, but it's almost a joke nowadays. It's like, well, no, unless I see a head. How did you describe it, Jacob?
Unless you see a decapitated head on a spike in a glass box that you keep, at your bedside and watch it every time when you wake up and every time when you go to sleep, and it's still there, not moving.
Do you know why that phrase, that whole sequence of things he's talking about exists? Because bad writers are basically using cheap, fake-out character deaths.
They don't want to get rid of this character.
Right.
Because they spent a lot of time on them.
But they don't know how to write a compelling story that involves
a new character.
Actual consequences.
Right, yeah.
So they go into this trap of basically making the reader or viewer distrust them by constantly cheating death, which is something that, it's something in the real world we're never going to experience. So it does have an interesting fantastical element to it.
Right.
And like characters that you've seen, you could probably list off a dozen off the top of your head, with some thought, that have done this cheating death type thing. It basically lessens the story opportunity for the future. If you're going to do this cheating death,
it usually works best at the end.
It usually works best at the very end, or at a point where this character story has ended. Basically to where their arc was to come back. That was the final bit of their arc. And then maybe they go off the story because now they get a chance at actually living for whatever reason. I've rarely seen that.
Yeah, I like when you were talking about that, I was like, I'm trying to think of an example. Not that
we're not talking about spoilers,
but just like for myself, like, and
I can tell you afterwards.
Couldn't think of one. Oh, okay.
I can tell you afterwards.
But Yeah, the whole cheating death at the end thing, like it can be used to great effect, but it also has to be in the right kind of story. Right. Like a happy Disney movie, can probably do that a lot better than Game of Thrones.
Absolutely. Yep. That's one of the things that in a lot of Disney, or even I'd say more so Pixar films, they will have it be a formula of there being some kind of death involved in the story. Not necessarily a specific character death, but a horrible death-related tragedy. And they handle it in such a way that's mature for the kids' show that it can rip you out of the story a little bit if you're maybe a kid. But for the adults, they're looking at this and going, whoa, that's a very real thing to deal with. And the emotion communicated is the primary points that they bring up. And then they have the story have some kind of residual effect based upon that death that happened. And it's a good formula, I'd say, for a simple story. It might be a little bit cheap when it comes to a longer running story like a TV show.
Right.
But for something that's only 90 minutes of,
it can be great.
Then it might be fine.
I just had this thought. Killing a character is kind of like cashing in your chips at like a casino. But you can't go back to the casino. Right, but you can't go back to the casino.
Which, you
can't
do with casinos.
Right. But the idea that it's like, okay, you're building up this character, you're getting your amount, the house's money or whatever. Yeah. And then there's that point where you want to leave. But you want to leave at the right time. You want to leave when
you want to leave when you're up.
You want to leave when you're up, and if anything, after you leave, you want to make sure you don't go back. Otherwise, you might lose some of what you built up.
That's a great point. Yeah.
So character deaths can be awesome. Just make sure you handle them well.
One of the other things that in live action shows in particular you notice is you'll see the character death of they ran out of their contract. The idea that there's some kind of out of universe reason as to why this character death happened, and it completely ruins immersion. Another problem that in anime you don't have to worry about that.
Right. That's true.
You just don't. The recasting side of it is only the voice, which can be almost easily mimicked sometimes.
Yeah.
There are a lot of shows that we've watched in particular where that was a legitimate thing. And I know one in particular where that happened quite a lot as they transitioned towards a bigger budget for the story as well. They got a lot of new voice actors to replace voices with people that had either... something had happened out of universe.
One other thing. Okay, so the biggest argument I hear a lot of people make for character deaths, specifically as opposed to not having character deaths, is they want there to be that gritty sense of realism, right? The idea that a lot of times people just die and that's how it is, right? Yep. And you can absolutely do that. Having the sense of no plot armor is great.
Yes.
It's fantastic. But just having characters die and have that be it.
Yep.
It's
cheap.
It's cheap. There's a difference between having characters die and just they die like people sometimes just die and the world's a cruel and unfair place. There's a difference between that and killing off a character and then doing nothing with that character death.
Right.
One of the not going to go into any details. There was a story that I read that did character deaths, but they had a bunch of character deaths towards the end, and they didn't have any of the characters really feel anything because of these character deaths. It's just all these characters in this sort of cluttered cast just die, and that's it. We don't have to resolve their stories. We don't have to do anything with that.
Yep.
They're just gone.
Right.
And just move along.
Yeah.
And it was not only immersion breaking, but it made me mad.
Right.
Because it's like, come on, I liked those characters. You can do better. Like, it feels like a disservice not just to the reader because they don't get to be emotionally eviscerated by the feelings that they get through osmosis from the characters in the story, but it also feels like a disservice to the characters themselves because why were they in the story for all that time if you aren't going to properly take care of them?
Yeah, one of the things about character deaths that I've noticed a lot of people say as writers that they don't want to do character deaths is because you're essentially saying, I have done the best I can with this character. But you're also breaking a little bit of realism by making it be that you only kill off characters when they're finished. The idea of what George R.R. Martin has done, people die in Game of Thrones, guys.
Yeah. We won't say who.
We won't say who, but the idea that he's basically said that, characters will die basically when they do things that warrant them dying. And that works for his story. But there's a lot of stories in particular where I've seen character deaths thrown around frivolously, like you're talking about, specifically for the purpose of shock and awe, or moving the plot along, or what have you. And the thing that we always like to basically preach around here at SOS is basically the idea that a good premise does not necessarily mean you'll have a good execution of that premise.
Yes.
You can have premise that's simple but perfectly executed, and you'll do a lot better than the perfect premise that's not executed well.
Right.
So I would say focus on execution, no pun intended, when it comes to character deaths. Because when you have the execution focused on quite well, you get those poignant moments before and after the character death where people go, whoa, that was something. That was really special. The feelings that character A had because of character B dying really made this real for me.
One of the things I want to give a shout out to Game of Thrones for, again, I won't go into details of who, but when characters die in Game of Thrones, and it is those sorts of points where they just died and you didn't see it coming, like you're just like, what? They're gone?
Yeah.
The other characters, there are lasting effects from the fact that those characters died.
Right.
It's not just swept under the rug, forgotten about, or whatever. And
those something it's good. I'm going to want to talk about
because there was an example of a particular character death that was fairly early on, and I sort of forgot about it. I'm like, I didn't really care much about that character.
Yeah.
But there was another character there was a character in the story that really cared about that character that died. And then way later they bring it up again of I remember. And it's like, oh, that's right. And it did so much to make me care about the fact that person died, because this person has been
caring about it all this time.
Yep. And
one of the things with character deaths that you can see characters with the writer in particular, the creator, is check to see how good they are with letting their characters have consequences. And death is just basically a final consequence.
And
hold on, it's the consequence that basically says you are no longer allowed to make choices as a character. You are no longer allowed to have consequences happen to you, because this is the final consequence. So when you have characters that have stories that have natural consequences of things that their choices leads to reactions on other side of things, having a negative build-up towards the actual character death is good. Very good. I think that having the Game of Thrones style is necessary for certain stories, but with others, I really, really appreciate it when, not in some sadistic way, but in a very natural way, the choices of the characters leads to the character death, not the will of the fate of the creator, or just kind of decides, and you shall die, boom. And when it's especially in line with the motivations of the character who dies. One of the things that I've seen quite often with the kind of good versus evil hero things is that one person who suddenly decides to be heroic, and they have almost contradictory aspects to their character for this, and then they die, and everyone goes, they were so heroic, we will remember them forever. You can kind of tell when they fell into that trap of having the martyr character who broke character for a little bit just for them to die, so the other characters can be like, this was our champion. I have seen it done right, but it's very easy to tell when it's not done right. It's not a thing that's got an objective like, this is a good one, this is a bad one. There are shades of gray in between, but when it leans really far to one side, you can tell which side it's leaning towards. So I just wanted to bring that one up, is basically allowing the character motivations and decisions be very much in line with the actual results, like results of the consequences, like, character deaths and what have you. Also, that's another good thing, is that the consequence of the death could lead to choices of the characters that could eventually lead to their character deaths.
And one other thing. Okay, so character deaths are not the worst you can do.
Oh, I agree.
So a lot of times people will think like, all right, character deaths, that's the top.
Right.
But there are so
way worse things.
There are way worse things you can do. And I'm not talking in some sort of dark, twisted sense, but
of, like, making people suffer.
Right. But the idea that, like, a lot of times if you put them in a certain situation, living on can be worse. Like, let's say you've got a bunch of friends.
You're talking about consequences.
Yeah, I'm talking about consequences. So let's say you've got a bunch of friends, right? And, in some story or whatever. Yeah. And, like, all of them die, really.
Right.
You could have all of them die, or you could have all of them die except one. And that can be way worse than having them go out in a blaze of bloody glory with all their friends.
Yeah, there's a lot of stories where I've seen where you have the lone survivor. We could go into the tropes surrounding character deaths, but then we'd be here until the heat death of the universe.
Yeah.
There are so many tropes around character deaths in particular. I would say the lone survivor one is a very common one. It's a very good one in a lot of stories. One of the things that I really like as far as, like, character death related tropes is I like the character death of the one where it's the death of their character, not necessarily the person, but that aspect of their character.
The person that they once were is no longer alive.
Right. It's the idea of basically, I don't want to give a specific example that's uncommon, but I run the risk of doing this. Like, there's the idea of, maybe I shouldn't give a specific instance.
No.
Okay, well, there's a character that's a very popular icon in pop culture, and they had a literal point in the story. It's not handled perfectly, but where they were one person and then they died from a certain point of view. Wink, wink. You know which one I'm talking about now. And they basically became another person.
Yeah.
But the idea, even within that story, is that there is the potential of a resurrection of that old person that they once were. And I would say that having a literal violent character death is not the only kind of character death. We've talked about how there's all kinds of ones out there of what the effect or the reason can be. But in a story that isn't some ultimate battle between good and evil or some fantasy, action, sci-fi, whatever, you can have a really heartbreaking thing happen to a character that literally kills that spark they had, that aspect of life. And I think that's the really big theme of character deaths in particular, is it takes away that spark of life, is in the literal sense, but oftentimes that effect, like a plague, spreads to those affected by the character death, and then they have a deathly almost visage about them because they were around the one that died.
And then you've got this great conflict that you can do where it's them dealing with that. Which is why we get so disappointed when that doesn't happen.
When it doesn't happen.
It's really sad.
You might as well have not killed them. And in fact, one of the things that a lot of people say is that, like, well, it's okay. Some character deaths, you're not meant to really care about them. I'm like, red shirts in Star Trek. I totally get it. But one of the things that you can still tell is that the story was built up from the get-go with that bit of potential lazy writing in mind. It's the idea that if you start from the beginning with the get-go of not having that be a part of your writing, you don't have to actually have it be in your story.
You don't. And one thing I want to say about the red shirts, if you actually go back to the old original Star Trek series, the red red shirt thing came from there, right?
Yeah.
But they actually took the red shirt death seriously. And the reason that I think it became a trope was because it happened so often and they took it too seriously.
Right.
When it's like, oh, which red shirt's going to die this time?
Right.
Spin the wheel, we'll find out.
But they did react to it strongly.
But they did have the characters react to it strongly, so that the first, couple times that it happened, it was actually kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
Like, it was a big deal. But then, of course, with repetition and, you become numb to it because it's just happened so many times.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So any trope surrounding, any trope in general, but also around character deaths, they're meant to be broken, whether that's through defying them or through owning them.
Yes, absolutely. So character deaths, they're a good thing. Handle with care, though.
Yes.
Handle with care. And really question about whether or not you should bring them in if your story wasn't crafted specifically with them to be a thing in mind.
Yeah.
Like the difference between Lord of the Rings or Nicholas Sparks, for instance.
Yeah. Like imagine if, say, like you're watching The Office and then suddenly one of the characters in there like dies tragically.
Right.
That's not what you're watching The Office for.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
You could still do it, but you're putting yourself into a very precarious position writing wise.
Exactly.
A very, very precarious position.
So should we get on to questions?
Let's get into questions and answers, guys. So the first question here comes from Irhina, saying, I'm a bit new here, but I'd love more info about Jacob's book. Very curious about it. Well, thank you for your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Info, Jacob. Give me a little... Spark Notes.
Yeah, so I recently changed the title from something else that it was previously to Battle Lines.
Yes.
It is a sci-fi young adult sort of adventure book with the main themes being morality and family.
Yes.
It centers around a group of kids that are basically raised and brought up by this general dude to save the world. Or the worlds, because multiple planets.
Sure.
And then... Conflict ensues,
yes.
Yes.
They could be brought together, torn apart. There's all kinds of things.
Battle lines will be drawn.
All right. Freya K3, or Freya K, asks, any tips on writing good characters? Well, that's an open-ended question. I see loads of great ones, and I love analyzing them. But when it comes to my own, it's always generic teen girl number one. I completely sympathize and empathize with you, Freya K.
And by the way, kudos on recognizing that.
Yes.
So many stories out there don't.
Yep. You'll see one by that one creator, and you're like, huh, that one character is in every single story they do. I'm not even sure that's really a good thing.
Yeah, like when you are asked to describe their character, like it comes more of like the stuff that happens to them, not who they are actually as a person.
Yeah.
So as ways to avoid the generic teen girl number one?
Well, I think tips on writing a good teen girl character, that's a whole like specific thing there, but I'd go for more of the general stuff. One of the things that I did as a tip for helping me write eventually good characters, because I would still say that I still write bad characters pretty frequently. It's the idea that like I don't know 100% how... if the character I'm writing is going to be necessarily good, they just might be meh. But practice writing characters. Just write a bunch of them. And don't be really attached to going deep into them. Basically, find some concept, some premise for a character, and write 3 paragraphs on each one. And then once you've written the 3 paragraphs, you're done. Move on to the next one. And basically look at all of those templates that you've drawn up. Then go back and give depth to them. But I could go into a little more detail, but I want to give you a chance to talk.
There are also a lot of questionnaires out there that you can just look up online where it's like 100 things to fill out about your character.
Yep.
Those can help a lot. One other thing, the generic teen girl number one thing, if you're in a setting where it's in normal world stuff, teen girl makes sense. It fits. So then all you have to do at that point is make them unique enough and have enough flair and personality to them that they'll no longer be just generic teen girl number one.
They'll be compelling teen girl number one.
They'll be compelling teen girl number one. The person will be like, that's not just generic teen girl. That's so-and-so.
Right. One of the things that Jacob has helped me with was the questionnaire bit. One of the things that I am very... very much like skilled with is the idea of developing their unique personality. But one of the things I did have a lot of trouble with was referencing all this data and keeping the character consistent. So what you'd have is a character that had a lot of personality and flair, but not a lot of consistent depth to them. And lining those two up, personality and the depth to them, was tough. So having a questionnaire as a reference sheet, essentially, for they're approaching this scenario. there are 5 potentials for conflict, and they are tied to this thing about their character, this thing, and this thing. Which is the most natural for them to bring up here? It's this bit about their mother. Oh, okay, we're going to bring that up here. And they're not the most overt character, so they're not going to go into detail about it. So they might be a little bit passive-aggressive.
Sure.
There you go. That's your teen girl generic character interaction bit when they come into a potential area of conflict. Mm-hmm. I think that writing good characters, there's a whole list of things that you can make sure your character has to make them more compelling. But I think, at the very least, getting that template down in the beginning and then writing consistently based on the template is good.
Yeah.
It's at the very least going to get you an above-average character.
Right. One of the things I specifically want to mention, don't feel like you have to do the waking up in the morning, looking in the mirror, and that's how you introduce them. Think about what's most important about your character. People don't really care about what they're wearing and things like that. Mm-hmm. That's not how you show who they are as a person. That shows you what they bought and what they look like. Get into the little bits of personality, the contradictions and idiosyncrasies, the quirks, all those little things that everyone has, but you might not let everyone see.
Yes.
Because that's what will that'll give you a much more intimate view on the character and make them feel more real, rather than just feeling like a random face that you might see walking down the street.
Right. One of the things that I've noticed is a hiccup for me with enjoying certain characters is the way they're introduced, and Jacob bringing that up is really good, because I would say introducing a character based on their personality and nothing else, and maybe a little bit of dialogue involved, is perfect. Because if you add in all this data in the beginning, it doesn't have any character connect to. It's basically a husk.
Yeah.
The data that you use as the template is not how you introduce them. That is the reference point for what kind of actions and choices and interactions they'll have when you introduce them as a character.
Yep.
It's a good question.
Molly Dolly. Great question. We've all had one. Who is your first and or most prevalent anime crush?
Oh.
You want to take this one first?
I don't think so. I have to think about that.
Okay. So, well, if it goes, that's tough. So there's first, and then there's most prevalent. So
and or. So
yeah, and or.
I would say the first super prevalent.
Everyone say prevalent around him now.
Yeah.
For me, it was Rukia from Bleach, just because that was the first show I really watched. But if you want to go for most prevalent, it probably would be Mikasa. Attack on Titan.
Saw that coming.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, the issue with me is I don't really do this that often. When you say we've all had one, it's actually really tricky because. No, you don't, Jacob.
Okay.
You're wrong. The idea that I've had one is actually not super accurate.
Well, it might not fall into that specific definition.
Right. The idea of a crush in particular is the idea that I had that moment where I was like, oh, whoa, I fancy you. I'm attracted to this. But I actually have a little bit of a problem with that, with actually having it be a thing where it was anything more than a, hey, that character's pretty cool, or hey, that character's pretty good looking, or oh, wow, I really like the way this story's going. So as far as character crushes go, it might have been
in whatever it was for you.
I think it might have been Katara. I don't know.
Okay.
From Avatar: The Last Airbender. I'm not sure. Yeah, it's really tricky because I know who my first celebrity crush was.
Right.
But that was because for whatever reason there's a disconnect in my head of crushing on an animated character versus crushing on a real person play acting another character.
And even with me saying Rukia or Mikasa, that I didn't actually crush on them, but from what they're saying, yes, those are the
right. But I don't even have it be that
ones.
Yeah, I don't even have it be that easy. So
okay.
I would say that's probably who it was. But even then, I didn't really think much about it. So. Who do I think is my most attractive anime character? I don't know.
Who's your favorite female character from an anime?
I don't have a clue. This is like a really tough question for me, so I guess we'll move on.
All right.
Nihar asks, how can we make a good detective show?
Okay.
It's a really tough thing to say, because I would say my favorite detective shows tend to be less about the solving of the crime and more about the banter of the characters involved in the said solving of the mystery.
And that's a lot of times I would say most detective shows tend to understand that, especially when they're episodic. A lot. Because they know that that's all they're relying on. If they don't have the banter, they don't have anything.
Right. But even the ones that have those but have the very stereotypical kind of storyline and such, I would say they need to have not just the banter, but have their characters actually go on arcs within the mysteries that they're solving or what have you. I think there was a show with Idris Elba in it, and it was either called Luther? Guys, I think it was called Luther. Go and look it up. It's one of the best detective shows out there.
Okay.
One of the best. It is 2 seasons or 3 seasons. It's really short, I'll tell you that much. It is not episodic at all. I would say staying away from anything episodic is a good start. You're basically a cut above 50% of all the detective shows out there by the minute you go linear storyline.
Yes, because that means that there's actual potential consequences. You could actually have character deaths of main characters because you don't know that they have to be there for the next, week's installment or whatever.
Right. I would say that's exactly it. And there's more fantastical, I would say, linear story detective shows out there like Sherlock from BBC and what have you.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's good, but I would say still you wouldn't necessarily want to copy something like that. Right. I think making a good detective show starts with you making a good cast of characters, giving them arcs, and then putting them in a situation where they would end up needing to be in a detective show.
I would say one of the things that, because Sherlock's a great example. As far as detective shows, I haven't seen Luther, but Sherlock's just fantastic. And one of the things that I would say Sherlock did that was really good, apart from the banter, because the banter was incredible, was that because they were longer episodes and fewer of them, it helped to break or to keep the illusion up that there was potential consequences and danger and things like that, especially since the best episodes were usually the last of the season, and then you don't they're gonna milk this cash cow as long as they can, but they could kill off the character anyways
making it about the characters 100%, and then give them a linear story with them having arcs, and that alone cuts you, I'd say, above 80% of most detective shows at that point.
If you can make it, this is actually a point where character deaths could be really good, because if you can make it so that there are character deaths and they actually mean something, and that you could potentially end the even if it is a serialized sort of format, end it early because people die or whatever. That would be huge.
Yep. All right. Daw asks, what are some of your favorite stories that take advantage of their medium? Books. Basically, when a book takes advantage of the fact that it's a book and really gets into the heads of the characters. Good. On a comedy-related note, I have to bring up a video game called Knights of the Old Republic 2. And it is so meta with realizing that you're playing a video game, and the story tells you, basically, you're playing a video game, and it's actually genius.
While still fitting in, without completely breaking the fourth wall, it still fits in with the story that they're doing.
Exactly.
Yeah, it is pretty fantastic. Most comedy anime actually really are taking advantage of the fact that they're an anime, so there's already that disconnect where you're not taking it too seriously, so they can do crazy wacky things and you'll go along with it because it doesn't look real. Also, Your Lie in April.
Specific?
Your Lie in April.
I haven't seen that.
I know, and I'm not going to say any spoilers for it, but just the fact that the music is so good.
And it couldn't be that good with those kids, is what you're saying.
Well, it couldn't be that good with those kids. No, what I'm talking about is the fact that it originally started as a manga. And one of the things that I always wondered is, because I haven't actually read the manga for Your Lie in April, but I always wondered, how do they actually communicate the impact of sound? When you're
reading
not just reading, but it is a
panel images,
right, because at least in a book then you could have like a bunch of descriptive words to paint like a picture in the person's mind, but when you have a manga, like
you have less room for actual like text and stuff. That's a good question. What makes a good or bad magic system? Well, we're getting into one right now that's really good with Hunter x Hunter. I would say there's not really a lot of ways to determine whether or not the magic system is necessarily good until you've had a lot of experience with it. But one of the things that I've noted of bad magic systems is they're not internally consistent. There are a couple ones in particular I remember, some really cringeworthy fantasy stuff, which, by the way, it's not hard to find bad fantasy stories out there.
A lot of times fantasy is an excuse for just bad storytelling.
And Legend of the Seeker had a really good potential premise with a really bad magic system.
And just bad writing.
Bad writing in general. Yeah. But that's one of the ones where I remember, that was awful.
That was so bad.
The reason why I can say it's awful comparatively to something that's probably way worse is because I actually watched all of Legend of the Seeker.
Me too.
Which
I can't believe I did.
Bad.
Okay, here's something that I would say is very important. Just because it's magic does not mean it's a magic system. In fact, the very idea of magic is contrary to a system. Because it basically says there's hand waving and something happens and it doesn't have to follow the rules.
Right.
So, having a magic system that is internally consistent, that does have rules, that follows those rules, that, if you can just do that, it will be, in some way, shape, or form, interesting. But then you just want to make sure that you don't bog the reader down with like the details and stuff.
Right.
Like,
Avatar: The Last Airbender did a very good quote-unquote magic system.
Right. Even though they hardly had any rules in it at all.
And well, no, they did have a couple rules.
They did, but it was like very few, and they spent very little time like saying, here are the rules of this system.
No, actually, they told us the rules really without actually telling us. There was the idea that a firebender couldn't bend water. And it's like a rule that doesn't need to be said.
Exactly.
You just say, the Fire Nation.
Exactly.
Oh, they have firebenders.
Yeah. Everyone uses martial arts to bend their respective element.
Right. The idea of hereditarily passing on your element to your child, that was a thing. There was a point in the show where they made fun of the idea that not everyone who's a child of a bender necessarily is going to have bending. Like with Sokka, the two twins at at the volcano
that
village
caused so much fan speculation of okay, so I guess it's not genetic.
Right, exactly. So and then there was the whole spiritual side of it as well as the martial arts.
Right.
I think that the idea of having a system, like Jacob said, is not necessary. But if you're going to have a system, you need to be consistent with it. Don't introduce a rule that you're not willing to keep. Right. I think that having a point where rules are broken is fun. You just need to come up with the reason why they were broken.
Right.
And have that be consistent.
Right. Maybe, have it be not so much that the rules actually being broken, but maybe the perspective that people had of the rules just wasn't quite right.
Right, but then you have to be careful about how many times you do that.
Exactly.
Because then they won't trust your system.
Exactly.
Yep. Next question is from Little Duck. What are some of the deepest emotions a story has made you feel? Oh, I had some really dark, heavy emotions with a certain set of stories where I got despair, heavy stuff.
I've had stories where it's okay, I need to go watch Sweetness and Lightning or something because I am just I'm not okay right now.
And I'm not saying necessarily depression, but the idea of basically the kind of the pointlessness of it all.
Yeah,
nihilism. Pure nihilism.
Yeah, that's
and that I think is good to experience at least one or two times in your life, but you don't need to live in that state.
You don't want to stay there.
You actually are missing out on a lot of good things. And I would say deep emotions doesn't necessarily mean negative. A lot of people equate a lot of I'm so deep, so I feel negative things.
Exactly.
What it does mean is you have a very open capacity to feel a lot of things.
Right.
But one of the deepest emotions I feel like a lot of people confuse to be exclusively an emotion is love. And there are some stories where I basically fell in love in the story. Like, that is just incredible. And I'm not talking about falling in love with the character. I'm talking about I have come to experience what love is by the story's own nature. Like, there was some aspect of truth that was basically communicated, maybe even intentionally. I would assume a little bit unintentionally because there's the subjective side of things. But I would say all the way from love to despair. Like, I've had the full gamut.
The two biggest ones that I can think of off the top of my head that just are presenting themselves a bunch. Mm-hmm. One is Wolf Children, because I feel like that made me really understand the idea of maternal love, which there'd always been a disconnect because one, I'm a guy, and two, I haven't had kids.
Right.
So that was huge. And then the other one, and this might just be because it was more recent, but oh boy, was Silent Voice.
Silent Voice,
Yep. And that's all I have to say about that. Just watch the first half hour and you'll know what I mean.
Yep. All right, next question. Do you think certain emotions are better or more important than others when getting your audience to feel things?
Yes, absolutely. The more relatable the emotion is, like the more likely the person is to have experienced that emotion, the better. Also, what kind of story do you want to have? Do you want it to be depression, or do you want it to be like positive and all that?
I would say having both fear and joy be some of the most exciting ones. You need to have both, I would say, in the same story. Because the idea of those emotions is that everyone has experienced one of those, like, a lot. Like, the idea that you have a lot of people that haven't necessarily experienced both a lot is also a very good thing to keep in mind. Because I feel like when you have an emotion that is one that you're like, that's common, everyone's experienced fear. Well,
then you might not paint as good a picture.
Exactly. So painting a really good picture, as you're saying, with like those two in particular, is really good. I think fear is a good one to bring up because you're not necessarily trying to make someone experience what fear is. You're trying to make someone have a somewhat connected experience to the nature of fear, like worry.
Yeah, and one of the other things I want to point out, so a lot of times emotions, it's not actually the emotions themselves that have the impact. It's the fact that the emotions are so incredibly different from your like default point, right?
Yes.
So a lot of times the most emotion that I've felt is not when there's some extreme emotion, but when it goes from one extreme emotion to a very different, very extreme emotion.
Right.
Because then the sort of emotional distance you've traveled is like, doubled or whatever.
Right, and that needs to have some kind of distance involved.
Exactly.
Not immediately switching, but yes, good point. All right, Flower Dance asks, what types of conflicts between characters are your absolute favorite? Well, that's a bit tough to answer. I would say that the conflicts that involve them growing together, basically something where they push each other onward.
Right. Conflicts about their desires and wants and things like that, not just conflicts because there's some external conflict of, whatever.
Yeah, it's the internal forces clashing between the two of them.
Right.
Yes. Do you prefer conflicts between antagonists or conflicts between protagonists?
Well,
I don't know. That's a good question.
I don't either.
Do you have a case to make for one, and I'll do a case for the other?
So I would say with in your conflict, it will always be between. There will always be at least a protagonist of the conflict and potentially an antagonist of the conflict. Because even if you're like, I know that you're probably
within the
about,
conflict itself.
Within the conflict itself, I know you're talking about with the overall story, right? Do you more like the conflict with the general like bad guys or whatever, or with the general good guys? Most of the time, I would say with the bad guys, just because that's something that's usually not done as much in like Marvel movies or whatever. But
there are other things that Marvel.
Yeah, no, I know, but I'm just saying that's like a classic example of when it's very much not done.
Okay, well, I was gonna say I'm gonna make the case for conflict between protagonists because with protagonists in particular, you have their motivations generally centered out. And one of the things that protagonists in stories that aren't very complex seem to do is they basically put that one protagonist that drives the story in front of everyone else, that none of the protagonists can get, the other protagonists can get in their way accidentally.
Yep.
But what I like is when you have protagonists that are both going after their goals, and there's just a point where they accidentally boop into each other. That conflict is basically what I was talking about in the previous question that you asked, is the idea of their internal motivations and character and all that coming into clash somewhat accidentally with someone that wants a lot of the same things but maybe feels differently about a specific way that they're doing it or what have you. Next question is kind of a big one, but we might not necessarily give you a great answer.
Inez
Martinez asks, could be wrong, but seems the current Star Wars greatest mystery is Rey's parentage. Your opinion. Ha! I am of the opinion that that Rey is the reincarnated chosen one.
Right.
And that she is basically Anakin Skywalker reborn.
Okay, yeah.
That is my ridiculous opinion. It is shared by many.
I'm on board with that.
But yeah, I'm sure there are a lot of other theories that make more sense than the one I just gave.
I think... So, J.J. Abrams was the one who set up Rey's character. And he likes...
No. J.J. Abrams was the one that directed and wrote some of the Star Wars The Force Awakens, but Rey's character was made before J.J. Abrams came on board.
Oh.
Come on.
Well, okay. The mystery of Rey's parents seems very much like a J.J. Abrams mystery box.
Yes, it is.
So I would not be surprised if basically J.J. Abrams had no idea who Rey's parents were going to be.
I agree.
And that he basically set it up as just a great mystery, and then someone else will have to figure it out. So I don't know. Hopeful, like there's a part of me that wants it to be a new character, like a new set of characters, you know,
right?
Like that it's not just drama with Skywalkers.
So she's not another Skywalker legacy character.
Exactly. But then there's the thing that makes me wonder about that, which is why I like the idea of her being more like Anakin, of just like,
because then she has no parents.
She has no parents. They don't have to deal with that. They don't have to worry about the fact that they don't have any characters that would be able to be her parents right now.
Right.
Unless they want to do drama with the Skywalkers.
Right.
So.
But I want to give a little bit of feedback, guys. Remember how when she picked up Anakin's lightsaber, the lightsaber called to her and showed her scenes from The Empire Strikes Back where it was Vader and Luke being there. Now, a lot of the other scenes had Luke involved in there, but it also had Kylo Ren. I feel like what the saber basically was doing was going through a little bit of its own personal history. But the reason why it would do that specifically with Rey was because, well, this is her saber. It responds to her. The idea that it was Luke's saber, so if she was Luke's daughter, then it would respond to her, I think is, not that good. So I'm of the camp that she's not Luke's daughter. She's something else.
Same here.
But specifically with her being also a reincarnation theory of Anakin as the chosen one, is it explains why she is so strong.
Right.
And gives it somewhat of a lineage bit without having it be a thing where you have to explain all this other story of why did two parents have a kid and leave her on Jakku.
Right.
So, yeah, I'm sure there's actually a lot more evidence towards my theory potentially working as well. It's not my theory, but I would love to know your guys' theories, though.
Yeah. Because the movie's coming out soon.
The movie's coming out very soon. In fact, when I get back, the movie will have just come out.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, right.
Yeah,
I was going to say, oh man, if you have to miss out on it, that's going to suck.
Well, no, I'm not missing out. I can just watch it later. But I do have to avoid the internet for spoiler reasons and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So extra reasons, stuff like that. But thank you guys very much for chiming in with
questions.
your questions. If you want to have us answer one of your questions in the next podcast, leave it in the comments down below.
Yep.
Also, check out our social medias in the description, Patreon, for supporting our channel. There's a lot of cool stuff in there for shows and what have you. And also a Discord. Also our Twitter.
Yep.
You can catch up with us as we give you news about things that are happening or changing for the channel, or all just interacting with us on a semi-casual personal level. Yes, I will be posting pictures up there as well.
Right. So the next podcast will be in a while.
Yes, the next podcast will be at least 2 weeks from now.
Right.
probably...
Unless I decide to get wacky while Caleb's gone.
Yes, Jacob does have the potential to do a solo podcast.
I can talk about things that would be spoilers for Caleb, and then just say, like, Caleb, don't watch this video.
All right, guys, this has been a lot of fun, but until next time, we're Semblance of Sanity. I'm Caleb.
I'm Jacob.
And we'll see you all next time.